Good morning. I'm Christian Stevenson with the Mississippi State University Extension Service in Hancock County. I'm going to give an introduction to high tunnels and discuss a little bit about what high tunnels are, some advantages of the use of high tunnels, and some considerations for growing crops in high tunnels. To begin with, a high tunnel is essentially an unheated greenhouse, and the use of high tunnels allows us to extend the growing season both in the spring and in the fall. Generally speaking, high tunnels are constructed of a metal frame that's covered over by a single layer of 6 mil greenhouse grade plastic. And one consideration for the use of high tunnels is that they are considered a non permanent structure. And as non permanent structures, their use on a property doesn't generally impact property taxes. The principal difference between a greenhouse and a high tunnel is that high tunnels use passive ventilation rather than any active heating or active ventilation like you would see in a greenhouse. And so, maintaining temperatures in high tunnels, the temperature increases through sunlight and heating the air inside the tunnel. And ventilation is achieved reducing temperatures by raising the sides of the high tunnels, raising the ends of the high tunnels, allowing crosswinds to circulate through the high tunnel, reducing the air temperatures. Some differences between high tunnels and greenhouses also include that high tunnels tend to have higher ceilings. That can be important as it allows machinery to be used inside of high tunnels. And additionally, in a greenhouse, generally we are producing plants in containers on benches, whereas in a high tunnel, we're generally producing either directly in the ground or in raised beds. And while high tunnels are not generally actively heated, occasionally you will see propane heaters or kerosene heaters being used to increase the temperature in the high tunnels when there are below freezing temperatures that are forecasted. Of course, the principal advantage of the use of high tunnels is that it allows us to produce crops in a larger window than we would in the field. In particular, planting in high tunnels will allow us to plant 2 to 3 weeks earlier than we would in a field planting. And even if we plant crops on the same day inside a high tunnel as we do in the field, the increased temperatures inside the high tunnel can lead to increased plant growth and earlier harvest. And by producing out of that traditional crop production window, producers are allowed to or are able to receive a premium price for the produce that they grow. And that can lead to overall higher gross sales and a higher income per unit area of production. Another advantage of high tunnels is we can see increased yields for the crops that we grow inside the high tunnels, as well as increased produce quality. And by producing earlier and by being able to produce crops later in the year, we develop a relationship with customers, and that can allow us to help to retain those customers throughout the growing season. So the big difference for high tunnels is that we can increase and maintain higher temperatures inside the high tunnels. That increase in temperature is governed by the sun. And so you will see variation in the temperature inside the high tunnel dependent on weather conditions, the time of day, and the time of year. Generally speaking, it's going to be cooler inside of a high tunnel on cloudy days than on sunny days. Cooler in the mornings and in the evenings that it would be in the middle of the afternoon, and generally in the spring and fall than in the summer. It is important to make sure we're maintaining an appropriate temperature for the growth plants. We don't want it to get too cold, but we also don't want it to get too hot inside the tunnel. And so, a tool that can be very effective in helping us maintain those temperatures is a minimum maximum thermometer that will tell us, give us information on when we should be raising and lowering the sides of the high tunnel, as well as giving us information on when we're going to be able to get our crops in the spring and maintain those crops in the fall. It can be very important, the site that we select for our high tunnel. We do want to make sure that we have an area of our landscape that is level It also has full sun exposure, and we want it to be free of any obstructions. Generally speaking, here in Mississippi, we do want to orient the long side of the high tunnel north to south. That serves for the best light interception. We also want to consider that placement in relation to any available water sources we have. Talk about irrigation in just a few moments, but we will need to make sure we have that water source available so we can deliver water out to our plants. Of course, there will be some digging in the establishment of a high tunnel. And so, for safety's sake, we do want to make sure we're aware of any underground power lines or gas lines and ensure that we're not interfering with any of those. We do also want to make sure that we have the high tunnel in an area that will be protected from strong winds. Those strong winds can cause severe damage to high tunnels, as you can see in the lower picture here. But we do also want to make sure that we have sufficient airflow through the house during the growing season in order to get that air transfer to be able to lower the temperature inside that high tunnel area. In terms of when to plant, there are some hints we can use for scheduling, though I think it's important to say that the best teacher for this, as with many things, is experience. But it is important to know the last freeze date or the first frost date throughout the year for the area of your production, as well as to know the days to maturity for the varieties that you're using. And always be aware, of course, that the weather varies from year to year fairly significantly sometimes. And so differences in weather from year to year can significantly affect our schedule. And again, using a thermometer to monitor the temperatures inside the high tunnel, both for the air temperature and the soil temperature, can be a valuable tool in determining when we want to plant inside the high tunnel. Of course, we also want to make sure, in terms of scheduling, that we're ready to have a market for what we're producing and be prepared for that, just as a general practice in our production. This chart comes from the Vegetable Production Guide for Mississippi State University Extension, and it shows the last freeze dates in spring for the different zones here in Mississippi. You can see in the very southern part of the state, where I'm located, that last freeze will very often be at the very start of March, whereas further up in the state, we'll see that be into the early part of April. But keep in mind for these planting dates, through the use of high tunnels and that season extension effect that we have, we're going to be able to plant a little bit earlier in that high tunnel than we will out in the field in the dates that are given on this chart. And again, as we mentioned, inside the high tunnel, we can generally start crops 2 to 3 weeks earlier before we would be able to plant them outdoors. But we still see some effect even if we plant on the same date because of the increased temperatures inside the high tunnel. We'll see increased plant growth, and we may see an earlier harvest even if we're planting at the same time. So as you see on the chart here on this slide, the plants in this study were planted at the same time. That higher dotted line shows the growth of plants inside the high tunnel. Lower sort of dashed line shows the growth of plants out in the field. You can see the increased growth that we get because of those increased temperatures inside of a high tunnel. And just to show that a little bit more visually, these pictures were taken at a farm where they were putting in a high tunnel in the field. You can see this is a fairly simple structure that's using PVC to make the frame of that, with wood being used to make the end walls. And this picture was taken in the mid to late part of April. And you can see a comparison there between the plants being grown inside that high tunnel area in comparison with the field. And in this case, I think maybe there's a little bit of difficulty in seeing a big difference between these plants, though the plants inside the high tunnel area are a little bit larger. But as we move to a picture taken about a month later, This was on May 20th. You can see there's quite a significant difference in the growth of the plants within the high tunnel in comparison to the plants that are outside. So some considerations that we want to keep in mind when we are building a high tunnel. Of course, we want to keep in mind the cost of the high tunnel. And because we have the cost of the production of that high tunnel and building of that high tunnel, we want to make sure that inside that high tunnel, we are producing a crop that has a high value. And so tomatoes and cucumbers are very commonly crops that are selected for growth inside high tunnels. In that high tunnel, we want to make sure that we're both getting an increased yield, and we're also being able to get into that market window where we can get a higher or a premium for the crop that we're growing. And there will be a slight increase in labor associated with management of the high tunnel, any minor repairs that might need to be made, and also just raising and lowering the sides is just a little bit of increased labor. There are kits available for constructing high tunnels from numerous retailers, as well as retailers that will provide a service in constructing them. Generally speaking, as I've mentioned earlier, the frame is made of steel, though there are some that are constructed out of PVC. Generally, 6 mil plastic sheeting is used as the cover material. 4 mil plastic sheeting has a tendency to tear a little bit more easily, and so I wouldn't recommend that. And we do want to consider what size of a high tunnel we're going to build. As we increase size, we want to make sure that we have the production area that we're going to be putting inside of that high tunnel. And there's a really good breakdown of the costs of construction for a high tunnel that you can find in the link that's put here on the slide. And this will be available to you as the materials that you receive as part of this meeting. Generally speaking, for a cost per square foot in the range of $1.28 to $1.47, dependent on the size of the high tunnel that you construct, with a slightly lower cost per square foot as the size of the high tunnel increases. And here you can see this is the process of building a high tunnel. The metal frame here has been put up out in the field. You can see a quite high ceiling that allows the equipment to enter into that area. So really large, good metal frame put up. And here we see the finished product, the finished high tunnel with the cover on and closed to increase the temperature inside there. And again, you can raise and lower the end walls, raise and lower the sides of the high tunnel as a way to affect the temperature inside. In addition to the use of high tunnels, there are some additional season extension technologies that can be used in concert with the high tunnel. And that can allow us to extend the season even beyond the capabilities of the high tunnel itself. So in particular, the use of raised beds and plastic mulches can be used and just to increase minimum soil temperatures to get to that level earlier in the year so we can plant earlier. Additionally, row covers or thermal blankets or cold frames can be used to protect plant canopies from cold damage. And by using these, using raised beds, using plastic mulch, and using row covers, we can extend that growing season an additional 2 to 4 weeks. Here you see just an image of a low tunnel being used out in a field environment. This essentially has the same effect as a high tunnel, increasing the temperature and protecting the plants from any cold temperatures. That can be applied inside a high tunnel as well, further increasing the temperature for those plants and providing additional protection from the cold. This similarly is a thermal blanket laid down to help increase and maintain soil temperatures so we can plant earlier. Of course, irrigation is going to be important in the use of high tunnels Most effective way to deliver water to our plants in the high tunnel is going to be drip irrigation. And drip irrigation itself has a number of advantages. Principally, we are very efficiently delivering water down to the root system of the plant. That allows us to avoid delivering water to other areas. And by avoiding that, we can limit the development of weeds inside the area of the high tunnel. In addition, because we're not overspraying the plants with water, many fungal and bacterial diseases require that extended period of free water on the leaves in order for diseases to establish. So we can see a reduction in disease incidence inside the high tunnel as well. Another important element of drip irrigation is that overall just lowers water use. So we see a reduction in any waste of water that we might have. Soil management is very important in high tunnels. We want to make sure that we are maintaining good soil quality. And high tunnel production is highly intensive and very demanding of our soils. One very important element in high tunnels is they aren't receiving any precipitation. And so we don't see any leaching of nutrients away like we might see out in field production. Additionally, we might also see that soils inside the high tunnel can become compacted and is going to be at a higher risk for loss of structure and loss of organic matter. So good high tunnel soil is going to have good physical structure, have good drainage and pH and organic matter. Is not going to be compacted. Of course, we want to make sure that we're taking steps to ensure that we don't see the buildup of soil-borne diseases. So important practices for our high tunnels is going to be maintaining soil health through adding organic matter, avoiding over fertilization, and crop rotation, again, to avoid the buildup of any soil-borne disease. Fertilization inside high tunnels is very efficiently done by delivering water-soluble fertilizers through fertigation or through the irrigation system. Compost can also be a very effective way of delivering fertilization into the high tunnel. And again, since the ground in that high tunnel isn't subject to precipitation, we can see a buildup of soluble salts in the soils. So soil testing is very important as just part of the management of fertilization inside a high tunnel. And when we're fertilizing, we want to make sure we're just using the lowest recommended rate that's provided by that soil test. And again, fertigation systems do a very good job of delivering the required nutrients out to those plants. Well, very much appreciate your time this morning, and I would also very much appreciate any questions you may have. And I'll see you back in just a little bit to talk about insect management in high tunnels. Thank you very much.